Okay, boys and girls, we've got an exciting one today. We've got the Linkwitz 521.4 loudspeaker system, and we're going to ask the question, is this truly deserving of the term breakthrough? I hope you enjoy it. Okay, I said that we would ask the question, does the Linkwitz 521 constitute some kind of a breakthrough in modern speaker design? And, you know, if you've watched my videos, you'll know that the answer is going to be yes. So rather than hold you in some kind of artificial suspense, what I want to do is get down to something I think is more important, which is let's talk about what we really mean by a breakthrough, because it's an overused word. All superlatives have become overused. There's awesome socks these days, and I don't know. It's a little hard to believe the adjectives that people are throwing around. So to not insult your intelligence, I'm going to give you a definition of breakthrough that I think you'll say, that's reasonable. So, what I mean by a breakthrough, and what I mean specifically in the context of this speaker, is a breakthrough is something that is new, meaning we haven't heard it before, or we haven't heard it very often, or we haven't heard it nearly done as well, and where that difference that we hear is musically meaningful or significant. So it's different and it's musically beneficial. Okay, that's what we mean by breakthrough. I want to give you some examples of products that I think, loudspeakers, that I think historically have met this definition. Those of you who have been around for a while will know what I'm talking about. This may not be that meaningful to the rest of you. But we're going to put on the screen a list of speakers that I have experience with. I'm not the significant thing here. I'm just pointing out that there are a whole bunch of speakers that I think could meet the definition that I just gave. And we're putting them on the screen right now, and you can see them, and you may have been around to hear some of them. Some are newer. Some are, 50 years or more old. Anyway, so there's a group of speakers that meet that definition. I want to contrast this because contrast sometimes helps us understand what we're talking about. I want to contrast this with speakers that meet the definition of good all-arounders, and good all-arounders that deliver some incremental benefit. I don't want to cast aspersions on those. Those are the speakers you probably end up buying, and it makes sense to buy because they're good all-arounders, and you want to listen to music. You don't want to have hi-fi that demonstrates some new approach or new technology or something. I mean, you might want that, but that's not the main thing you want. You want music. Okay, so here's another list, and this is a list of speakers over that roughly that same period that I think most of the people who would listen to them meet the definition of a good all-arounder judged on musical criteria. One of the things you're going to notice, I think, you tell me, is that a lot of the speakers that are on the breakthrough list use some different principle, and very often that's a different driver technology and a different driver layout. Also, and this will become important, but I'm going to point it out now, hopefully you can remember it, a lot of the speakers on that list are either dipole, omnidirectional, or narrow dispersion. They're really different from conventional box speakers, woofer, mid-range, tweeter kind of speakers in terms of their radiation pattern, and that will become significant in a minute. So I'm going to say right now, I think the Linkwitz 521.4 is a breakthrough kind of speaker and I'll come back in a minute and we'll talk about what it is and then why. All right, what is this thing? The Linkwitz 521.4 is a four-way speaker with tweeter, upper mid-range, lower mid-range, and two woofers in this cabinet here. As you can see, it looks a little bit unconventional, so the fact that it sounds different might not come as a huge surprise when you just look at it. What's interesting about it is it's a dipole. It uses dynamic drivers, so it's not a planar like an electrostat or a planar magnetic would be. It uses conventional dynamic drivers, but it is a dipole speaker. That means that the tweeter radiates front and rear. It's actually got two tweeters. The tweeter radiates front and rear. The upper mid-range radiates front and rear. The lower mid-range radiates front and rear. And the woofers radiate front and rear. We'll talk in a bit about why Linkwitz is doing that, but that's the setup. So it's completely open baffle. It is not, there's no enclosure per se. It's a structure to support the drivers. In addition, each channel, left and right, comes with a dedicated crossover four-way and 5 channels of amplification. 5 channels because there are 2 woofers and each woofer has its own amplifier. So you get 5 channels of amplification and a 4-channel electronic crossover, plus some frequency contouring, which I'll refer back to because you've got to understand how dipoles work and a bunch of other Tom goes nuts on how things work kind of stuff. Anyway, so you're buying a mid-sized floor-standing speaker with amplification, and the fact that the crossovers are electronic is nifty, but you would get a crossover in pretty much any speaker you buy, so okay. The price point on this is 20,000 euro or 24,000 US dollars, but remember, you're getting an amp, 2 left and right amplifiers, and the speaker for, I'm going to speak in US terms, for $24,000. So it's kind of like, I don't know, pick your numbers, but it's kind of like a $17,000 speaker and a $7,000 amplifier, or you can, split it any way you want. What I want to impress on you is for something that's a breakthrough, it's not super expensive. Now, if we think of it in speaker terms, it's not cheap either. $17,000, just to use that number, is not a cheap speaker, but there are many, 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 many speakers that are above that price point. So we have to think about value in this equation as well. And if it's a breakthrough that also is good in other conventional terms, I think we're talking about a potential important value here. Okay, so that's what the Linkwitz 521.4 is. And in the next section, we'll go on to talk about why there's this crazy, some people say it looks like a tulip, dipole dynamic driver setup. Because you sort of have to understand the theory to get what Siegfried Linkwitz, who has passed away, and the company that he was the progenitor of are trying to do. Why is the Linkwitz 521.4 a breakthrough when you listen to it? And I will tell you, I strongly encourage you, if you live in a location near an audio show, or if you like flying on planes, to go to an audio show and hear a demonstration of this. Linkwitz also has Linkwitz lounges, which I don't quite understand what they are, but they're demo locations where you can hear the speaker. It's really fun. I think you'll enjoy it. I highly recommend it. What I hear and what other people who I have brought with me to hear this speaker when it's been demoed at audio shows or when I've had them set up here in my large listening room is the ability to reproduce depth, spatial depth, and spatial width in a way that goes beyond almost any other speaker that I've heard. I don't have a perfect memory and I don't have a perfect catalog of what I've heard, and I've heard some really outstanding speakers. But this is way up there, and I would say right now it delivers a better sense of depth and width than any speaker I remember hearing. And it does something else that I don't really ever remember being consistently done, and that is it can reproduce sound outside the locations of the left and the right speaker, so the stage width can be wider than the setup you've got, the left-right setup. So over here, here's where the center axis of the speaker is, and it can reproduce sounds over there like almost outside the wall of the listening room. So that sense of width can be a big deal. I think it's particularly important on orchestral music. Robert Greene did a very nice piece recently in the Absolute Sound magazine, which you might want to look at, where he measured the angles of the stage from various listening positions within a concert hall, and the width of the stage is just much bigger than what you would typically have in a stereo setup, but this gives you some of that grandeur by presenting the image as wider than wherever you have the speakers located. This is not bloat, because the Linkwitz speakers can locate the performers more precisely than most other speakers I've heard. I wouldn't say it's like breakthrough level in that regard, but it's really good at performer placement, which is part of realism. So if you imagine a jazz quartet in a club, you get this wonderful sense that like the saxophonist is over there and the piano is over there and the drums are in the middle and there's a singer here, let's say, up front. So you get the front to back depth of hearing performers behind performers, and the left and right performers and the center performers are quite precisely located such that you get a feeling that they're like, it's weird, but like they're really there, like they're standing in your room. That's way more believable with a jazz quartet than it would be with a 100-piece symphony orchestra, which just like can't physically fit into your room. But a jazz quartet sort of could fit into your room, and it's strikingly evocative of the real thing. I'm going to come back to that because that evocation of the real thing is very important to having your ear not overly concentrate on little frequency response errors in the recording or whatever it might be. You're less sensitive to that kind of thing. Anyway, so you got really good stage width, really good stage depth, and excellent placement of the players. Give you one more example. So I like to listen to the Mahler First Symphony. The first movement has a really nice layering effect where more and more instruments are brought in. But if you know the layout of a symphony orchestra, when these instruments come in, you hear them pretty much where they should be. And the striking thing for me was like instruments that are farther back on the stage sound farther back on the stage, right? Woodwinds are farther back on the stage than violins are. the violin is, first violinist is right down here next to the conductor, right? And the woodwinds are back there, and it sounds like that. Same thing with timpani. Timpani is, back left in a typical symphony setup, and you hear them as being farther away and located, on the left side. It's just, I can go on and on and on, but it's quite exciting to hear this difference. Because of the way, I'll just finish my rant on classical stuff. Because of the way classical recordings are made, it's probably more fine-grained imaging than you would actually have in a concert hall from, say, row M. But c'est la vie, you kind of have to live with the fact that accurate reproduction is going to accurately reproduce how the recording was done. And, modern symphony recordings have the mics probably closer to the orchestra than you were. I can go off on how studio recordings are done with rock and jazz, and that's another thing where you're going to hear it. So if the recording is not great, you're going to hear that it's just not a wonderful spatial recording, even though the playing might be phenomenal. Okay, so stage width and stage depth, very impressive. Realistically, I'm going to say the best I have heard. But then I want to talk about that almost voodoo weird thing, which is there are tracks where you can hear imaging. Now, I've just talked about how these speakers present depth. You hear performers to the side in front of the plane of the speakers. You can hear sounds from behind you. How can that be if Linkwitz is wrong? Meaning, Linkwitz says the recording encodes the location of performers relative to the microphones, and to present an image behind you, it kind of has to be a data stream going to your ear-brain combination that creates that effect, because there is no speaker back there. And the common model in stereo of, okay, you've got a right speaker and you've got a left speaker, and we can create this little sound stage in between the two speakers by blending them with, different potentiometer settings, is kind of got to be wrong if these speakers can do that. If these speakers can put a sound over there, I'm talking about in front of this speaker and to the side, something's got to be going on where the speaker is, I'm using my analogy for what I believe Linkwitz says, the speaker is essentially giving your ear-brain combination data, and your ear-brain combination knows how to decode it if the recording is properly made. Now, I frankly don't consider the ability to throw an image on the sidewalls or behind you to be particularly significant. Music is generally not played that way, so it's sort of a party trick, but I think it shows you what the speaker is capable of given the data set, and is a dramatic introduction to, I'm listening to something different. And then when you actually listen to it on well-recorded music, it presents the well-recorded music, in my view, properly with width and depth that is appropriate to the kind of music and the recording. You are always subject to how the recording was made and how well the recording was put together. All right, so that's sort of the big news here, is the spatial element of how these speakers deliver sound. In the next section, I want to get to, the rest of the package, because one of the problems with all of those speakers that I mentioned historically, as being breakthroughs is they usually were great at something, and then the rest of the speaker had some flaws that made it a little hard to live with. How about that?
Just a brief interruption, esteemed viewers. As you may know, I'm Tom Martin, Chief Content Officer of The Absolute Sound. We have a new product. It's on the Substack platform, and we're going to do some interesting things with Substack. First of which is reader questions and answers. Each Monday, readers will submit questions. We'll pick the most interesting ones and we'll answer the questions on Friday. We'll also have early access to articles and special blogs that don't appear anywhere else. We hope you'll join us. It's only a cost of a cup of coffee per month. Just check on the screen or in the show notes below. Thanks, and now back to the show.
Okay, we've talked about the sound staging of the Linkwitz 521, but I want to just briefly touch on how they need to be set up to do what Linkwitz calls the magic that hopefully I just described at least reasonably well or tantalizingly well. So as we said, these are dipole speakers. That means their radiation is pretty well minimized in the plane lateral to the direction the drivers are facing. So one of the things Linkwitz has you do is they have you first set them up a meter or more from the sidewalls. That means that any first reflection will be delayed by an amount that allows the precedence effect to hear it as not part of the original signal. Remember, we're not trying to distract you from hearing what's on the recording. We're trying to have any ambient sounds be not treated as a core part of the recorded sound. Anyway, so they have the speaker 1 meter from the sidewall so that there's enough of a delay between any radiation to the side and bouncing off the wall and getting to your ear so that your ear doesn't hear it as part of the core primary sound. Okay, in addition, they've made this top panel so that it can be pivoted. And what you do is, with the help of an assistant, you turn this until the lateral plane reflects in a mirror so that you know that this direction, which has the minimum amount of primary output, that this direction is aimed at the first reflection point, and therefore they're further minimizing the amount of that initial sound that's going to arrive at your ear. In addition, they want the speaker placed 6 feet or more. I have it at, I think, 9 feet from the rear wall. And they want the speakers to be in a pretty classical kind of equilateral triangle format, with the speakers and the listener centered between the two speakers at roughly equilateral triangle distances, and the listener to be a significant distance, 6 feet or more, I think, off of the rear wall. They're trying to have reflections off of this wall and reflections off of the rear wall also not combine in such a way that your ear would hear them as primary sound. They want it to be treated by your ear-brain combination as secondary sound, so they're getting the speakers away from these potentially reflective surfaces. Obviously, one of the hardest ones to deal with in most rooms is going to be the sidewall reflection. So they do this double whammy of placing at a certain distance and also having the lateral plane aimed at the first reflection point. So you need to do those things to be able to get the spatial, again, a Linkwitz term, the spatial magic that I just described. Okay, let's talk about the rest of the sound quality of the Linkwitz 521.4, because that's totally important to its livability. I mean, I like spaciousness and I like sound staging probably as much as anyone I've ever met, because it's an important factor in the sense of realism, the suspension of disbelief, if you will. But it's far from the only thing. And for a lot of people, it won't be maybe that important. Okay, so I have on my friendly iPad, I've got my listening notes because I've got a number of factors I want to talk about, and I want to make sure I don't miss something. First of all, I really like the bass of these speakers. The exceptional thing I noticed was what I'm going to call bass color density. It's just a rich, tuneful, not sludgy or turgid or one note or resonant kind of sound. It sounds like instruments actually playing more than a lot of speakers do. And I think the dipole arrangement may be a little bit less affected by room resonances, so that could be a factor here. So another way to say this is bass detail is very good. Not the best I've ever heard, but it's very, very good. And they go quite low. I don't think this maybe is not, I don't know, probably not the speaker for, total organ music fanatics who, want to play the Vidor, whatever it is, that's got a 22 hertz or a 16 hertz note, but they'll go low, and they go low with some real power. So I thought the bass was good in many ways. The next thing I really liked was the octave to octave balance, top to bottom, felt just really nicely balanced. You recording after recording after recording, you didn't have that, oh, it sounds kind of bright. Oh, it's a little bit thin. Oh, there seems to be a mid-range suck out. Oh, there's this, there's that. It's a really balanced speaker in terms of frequency response. Now that's the, sort of broad scale view. I do think there's something in the upper mid-range that's a little bit strong. I wouldn't say rough or peaky because it's a very smooth sounding speaker, but there may be a little elevation somewhere in the upper mid-range. I didn't particularly find it annoying, but it sounds a little bit not quite right in terms of that frequency balance. That also could be something that, if I had a month to play with dialing in the exact positioning and ear height, because the acoustic center of the speaker is right here, and getting your ear there takes a little bit of work. But to tune that out, maybe an inch up or an inch down would matter. And I played with that, but that I could spend a week dialing that in, and usually do if I own a pair of speakers. But on test, there just isn't that much time. The other thing I really liked was these things are dynamic. A lot of the great speakers in terms of transparency aren't that punchy. Then you get, I mentioned the avant-garde, so I'll mention those. Then you get the punchy speakers that maybe aren't great in terms of octave to octave balance. Not saying that of the avant-gardes. I'm saying you can certainly have that with some horn speakers, but these are really dynamic, especially on, I noticed it especially on drum kit, because you just get some power on snares and toms that it feels quite real. Yeah, anyway, I loved it. I mean, I like drums. I don't know. Are you alive? Then you like drums. Okay. Anyway, that dynamic pop was a really nice thing. They, I think, are not the state of the art in terms of micro detail kind of transparency. Some of what you hear when you listen to the really high-end speakers. I'm thinking of the great Magicos and the great Wilsons, and I could go on about other brands. But they do just down to like into the noise floor level of detail. And I didn't quite get that feeling with the Linkwitzes. I haven't heard it on other $17,000 speakers either, so maybe it's a function of like super advanced driver technology or amp combinations or whatever. And then finally, in terms of amplification, those of you who know how amps work, when you see the B-roll we do of the amplifiers, will instantly know these are Class D. You can't build a small box with 5 powerful amplifier channels in it and have it be really any other topology. So these are Class D amps, but they don't have the Class D hash. Not every Class D amplifier has it, but there's, some of them do, and people get worried about Class D, but I wasn't troubled at all by it. Treble tonality sounds very nice here. They almost sound like MOSFET amps, if you know what I mean. Yeah, there's just a smoothness to the high frequency sound that I found really enjoyable. So the downside of Class D just doesn't seem to be here. And because they're Class D, for this kind of price point, we've got, I think, a lot of power on hand. I don't know what the spec is, but it sort of doesn't matter. The things will play quite loud and very dynamically, as I said, and I just don't see the downside to the built-in amplifiers. If you like to play with amp speaker combinations, it's a drawback. You can buy the speaker, by the way, without the crossovers and without the amplification, but that with a speaker like this, that puts you into the engineering domain that I just think I would not go there. I would not recommend that my best friend go there. So anyway, take that for what it's worth. I thought the amplifiers were quite fine, and of course they're very well matched because there's a lot going on in their crossovers and frequency contouring. That's a big part of the engineering that's on hand here. Okay, so that's kind of my summary on sound quality. But what we have is a speaker that can do imaging that's unlike really anything I've ever heard, together with most of the other sound quality things we want, and almost no drawbacks at a very reasonable price. As you can tell, I'm impressed. I think you should go hear these if you're shopping in this price range, and if you like the aesthetic, which is admittedly different, the little panel that I use to take a look at the speakers and give me their feedback on it was like 3/4. That's kind of cool. Also, for a relatively big, powerful speaker, the visual impact, despite the unusual shape, the size of the speaker is not like huge and overwhelming. If you want huge and overwhelming, this is not your speaker. If you want something that doesn't have a huge visual footprint, this isn't really much more visually impactful than a stand mount monitor. Yes, it's got these bass cabinets. I grant you. Anyway, that's up to you, but you've got to pass that test, and some people might not be able to stomach it, but a lot of people seem to really like it and think it was cool that it was different. So there we have it. The Linkwitz 521.4, I believe it can be considered a breakthrough in the sort of historical terms of breakthrough that I opened with, which is a speaker that does something that you really haven't heard any other speaker do, and have that thing be a musically valuable thing, not just a party trick. So I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, I would invite you to subscribe, click on the notifications bell. Please sign up for our newsletters. And of course, as always, we would love it if you subscribe to the magazine where you get the vast majority of our reviews. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.